Three alien sisters laughed at the human, until their king claimed him as husband. Daniel Ward had never seen a city like Velthra Prime. Its towers shimmered like sculpted crystal, glowing with soft violet light that seemed to hum with life. Airships drifted across the skyline, their sails glittering as if woven from stars. He walked through the palace gates with stiff shoulders and a nervous heart. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat with years of experience. He was simply an envoy, a messenger chosen because no one else had wanted to take the risk. Humanity was still new to the interstellar stage. To the Velthrans, Earth was little more than a child species, fragile, small, and naive. Daniel felt that weight with every step he took across the polished crystal floors. Inside, the banquet hall stretched higher than any cathedral he had ever entered. Chandeliers of carved gemstones bathed the chamber in shifting colors. Alien nobles stood taller than any human, their violet skin glowing faintly beneath the light, their silver eyes watching with cold interest. Their voices echoed like music, melodic and sharp, a language that still felt strange even through the small translator badge pinned to his chest. Daniel tried to walk with confidence, but the moment he reached the long banquet table, he felt the stares. Dozens of nobles turned to look at him, some curious, most amused. Their silver eyes studied the folds of his earth-made suit, the translator badge on his chest, the awkward way his hands clenched as he bowed. He could feel their judgment without a word spoken. He sat carefully, trying to mimic the posture of those around him. The plates were crystal discs. The cups shimmered with strange liquid. He copied their gestures, but when the first toast was called, he raised his glass at the wrong time. The nobles chuckled. When the servants laid a strange dish in front of him, he hesitated too long, sniffing it before tasting. The room burst into quiet laughter. Then it came, the sound that cut him deeper than any blade. Three princesses sat across the table, radiant beyond anything human eyes had ever witnessed. Their violet skin shone like silk under the lights. Their gowns rippled with living threads that shifted color as they moved. Each carried herself with the grace of a queen. They leaned close together, whispering in musical tones before breaking into laughter. Their silver eyes shimmered with mockery as they looked at him, at the human fumbling among gods. Their laughter spread. Nobles smirked. Ministers covered their mouths as they chuckled. The sound rose higher, bouncing across the crystal walls, until Daniel felt the weight of the entire empire's ridicule pressing against him. He lowered his eyes, swallowing the burning shame. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to vanish back to Earth where no one would know of this failure. His hands trembled against the polished table. Then the sound stopped. A silence deeper than night filled the hall. Daniel raised his head slowly, confused. The king had risen. He towered over them all, a giant with broad shoulders wrapped in robes of white and gold. His crown gleamed like molten silver. His voice rolled across the chamber like thunder. Enough! The single word silenced every tongue. Nobles froze. The princesses straightened, their laughter caught in their throats. The king's silver eyes scanned the hall, then fixed on Daniel. For a moment, Daniel thought the king would order him thrown out, perhaps worse. But instead, the king's voice boomed, filling every corner of the chamber. "This human," he declared, pointing toward Daniel, "will be the husband of my daughters." The words struck like lightning. The hall gasped in one united breath. Goblets froze midair. Nobles stiffened in shock. The three princesses stared wide-eyed, their smiles vanishing at once. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. His heart slammed against his chest. Surely he had misheard. Surely the translator badge had glitched. But no, the gasps, the whispers, the stunned silence told him the truth. He had not come here to be honored. He had not even come here to be respected. He had come here to be claimed. Daniel sat frozen, his mind refusing to process the words. Husband, daughters. The alien king had not spoken in metaphor or jest. He had spoken with authority, and the stunned faces of the nobles confirmed it. The three princesses rose from their seats as if struck. Their silver eyes widened, Disbelief etched across their violet faces. One of them spoke, her voice sharp and trembling. "Father, you cannot be serious." Another added, her words like steel. "You would bind us to him?" She spat the last word with disgust, gesturing at Daniel as though he were no more than a blemish on the banquet. The third said nothing. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Her gaze shifted from the king to Daniel, her face pale beneath her violet glow. The nobles began to whisper, voices colliding in the silence. "The king has lost his mind. This is madness. A human consort? It is a humiliation." The chorus of disbelief swept across the hall until the king raised a single hand. Silence fell again. His voice boomed, leaving no space for defiance. "My word is law. This human will be joined to my bloodline. Those who challenge it, challenge me." Daniel's throat went dry. His translator badge flickered with light as it caught every word, repeating them in his ear with clinical precision. His heart thundered. He wanted to speak, to protest, to declare that this was a mistake. But the weight of the king's gaze pinned him to his chair. The banquet ended without laughter, without smiles. Servants moved stiffly. Nobles left the hall with their heads close together, whispering venom behind jeweled masks. The three princesses walked away without so much as looking at him, their gowns trailing like ripples of moonlight on water. Daniel rose slowly, his knees weak. He felt as though he had stepped into a trap, one so vast he could not see the edges. Later that night, a chamberlain escorted him to his quarters. The halls of the palace glowed faintly, alive with veins of crystal that pulsed like a heartbeat. Daniel barely noticed. His mind replayed the king's decree again and again. Why him? Why a human? He had no wealth. He had no standing. He was not even the most skilled envoy Earth could have sent. He was an outsider, mocked, ridiculed, a novelty at best. Yet the king had thrown him into the center of alien politics with a single sentence. Inside his quarters, Daniel collapsed into a chair, his hands pressed against his face. He wanted to send a message to Earth to demand extraction. But the communication relay was locked. He was a guest, yes, but also a prisoner. Hours passed. The palace outside grew quiet, but whispers lingered in his mind. He could hear them, imagined or real, echoing from the banquet hall. The king is desperate. He seeks to defy the noble houses. He would rather shame us than bend to their will. The truth struck him like a cold blade. He understood. The king had not chosen him out of kindness or chance. He had chosen him because he was harmless, because no noble house could claim him, because he was outside every thread of their political web. A human husband meant no alliances, no power shift, no victory for any rival. The king had not chosen Daniel as a man. He had chosen him as a weapon. And Daniel realized with sinking dread that weapons are meant to be used or destroyed. That night he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the three princesses. Faces twisted in scorn, eyes sharp with resentment. He imagined their voices, the laughter that had pierced him, now replaced by fury at being bound to someone so beneath them. But beneath the dread was a deeper fear. He had seen the whispers in the noble's eyes. Not curiosity, not confusion, hatred. They would not allow this union to stand. The palace of Velthera Prime glittered like a jewel under the twin moons, but to Daniel Ward it felt more like a cage. His chambers were luxurious, crystal walls that pulsed with faint light, silk-like sheets woven from alien fibers, a balcony that overlooked the city glowing like starlight, but none of it brought comfort. He paced the floor, his thoughts racing. Somewhere in this vast palace, three princesses were surely speaking his name with bitterness. Somewhere in the shadowed halls, nobles were plotting against the decree that had shocked them all. He was not naive enough to believe this would end quietly. His fears proved true faster than he imagined. That evening, a servant entered his chamber with a silver goblet filled with deep red wine. The man bowed low, his violet skin glistening in the glow of the crystals. "A gift," he said, his silver eyes fixed on Daniel. "From the king's personal cellars. An honor rarely given." Daniel hesitated, but to refuse might appear insulting. He lifted the goblet, the cool metal pressing against his fingers. The scent was sharp, almost metallic. He raised it halfway to his lips. Then instinct, simple, primal, made him pause. Something was wrong. His hand trembled. Slowly, he lowered the goblet and poured a single drop onto the polished crystal floor. The wine hissed. A faint trail of smoke rose from the spot. Daniel's heart lurched. He looked up sharply, but the servant was already gone, the chamber door closing silently behind him. He set the goblet down with care, his hands shaking. They had tried to kill him. Not with words, not with politics, but with poison. Sleep was impossible after that. He sat by the balcony, his eyes fixed on the glittering city below, every shadow now a threat. The translator badge against his chest pulsed faintly as if listening to his heartbeat. Hours later, he decided to clear his head in the palace gardens. Perhaps foolishly, he thought the open air might ease the suffocating weight pressing on him. The gardens stretched vast and wild, filled with flowers that glowed like fireflies and trees with silver leaves that whispered against the night. But the peace shattered in an instant. A rustle, a shift in the shadows, then movement too quick, too precise. Daniel spun just as a figure leapt from the darkness, blade flashing in the moonlight. The assassin's violet skin shimmered under the silver glow, his face hidden beneath a mask. Daniel stumbled back, his instincts screaming. He had no weapon, no training. The blade slashed across the air where his chest had been a heartbeat ago. Daniel grabbed a fallen branch, jagged and heavy, and swung with desperate strength. The wood cracked against the assassin's wrist, forcing him to drop the blade. The masked figure snarled, lunging again. Daniel shoved with all his weight, the two of them crashing into the glowing flowers, their light bursting in frantic sparks. The assassin struck his side, pain flaring through Daniel's ribs, but he clung to the branch like his life depended on it, because it did. Another swing, another strike. The assassin faltered. Daniel slammed the branch down again, his breath ragged, until at last the masked figure staggered back and fled into the darkness. Daniel stood trembling, chest heaving, his shirt torn, his hands slick with sweat and dirt. He stared after the retreating figure, every nerve alive with terror. He had survived, but barely. When he turned, he realized he was not alone. 3 figures stood at the edge of the garden. The princesses. Their gowns shimmered in the moonlight, their silver eyes wide. They had seen him. They had seen a human, fragile and untrained, face down a killer with nothing but desperation and instinct. The eldest princess's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The second tilted her head, her earlier scorn replaced with something quieter, something curious. The third's expression softened, her gaze fixed on him as though seeing him for the first time. Daniel straightened, though his body screamed in pain. He said nothing. He simply looked back at them, breathing hard, refusing to bow, refusing to shrink. And for the first time since arriving in Velthera Prime, the 3 princesses did not laugh. The garden attack was only the beginning. Word of the attempt spread quickly through the palace, carried by whispers that slid like smoke through the crystal halls. Nobles muttered that the human would not survive the week. Ministers exchanged glances heavy with meaning. Yet the king said nothing, and his daughters kept their silence. Daniel endured the stares during the days that followed. Servants paused too long in their duties, their silver eyes lingering on him with pity or scorn. Guards looked at him as if measuring his worth. He felt the pressure of 1,000 eyes, waiting for him to stumble, waiting for him to fail. But something had changed. The laughter that had once followed him through every corridor was gone. In its place was curiosity, and in some faces unease. He had faced death and he had survived. The princesses, too, were different. They no longer openly mocked him. Their words were few, their gazes guarded. But at meals, he caught them watching when they thought he would not notice. Sometimes their expressions were sharp with suspicion, but other times softer, almost uncertain. The shift became real one night. Daniel had been walking the palace's outer balcony, the cold night air brushing against his face. Below him, the city glowed like a galaxy spilled across the ground, ships drifting between towers of living crystal. He found the sight almost comforting, until he heard the sound, quick footsteps, too light to be a guard. A scream tore through the air. Daniel's heart lurched. He sprinted toward the sound, rounding the curve of the balcony. There, surrounded by 3 cloaked figures, was the youngest princess. Her violet skin shimmered pale with fear as one attacker gripped her arm. Another raised a curved blade, and the third blocked her path to safety. Daniel did not think. He ran. He had no weapon, no armor, nothing but the same desperate courage that had carried him in the gardens. He slammed into the nearest cloaked figure, the force driving them both against the railing. The assassin stumbled, but Daniel's momentum carried him forward. He grabbed the man's wrist, forcing the blade aside, and struck with his elbow, again and again until the grip loosened. The princess wrenched herself free, but another figure lunged at her. Without hesitation, Daniel threw himself between them. The blade sliced across his shoulder, fire lancing through his flesh. He gritted his teeth and shoved back, seizing the assassin's arm and twisting until bone cracked. The last attacker fled, dragging his wounded companions into the shadows. The princess staggered, her chest heaving, her silver eyes wide with shock. Daniel swayed, his breath ragged, blood warm against his shirt. But he stood firm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice strained but steady. For a moment, she did not answer. She only stared at him, as though unable to believe what had just happened. Then her lips parted, her words soft. "No, you saved me." Daniel gave a faint, humorless smile. "Then we should call it even. You did not laugh at me this time." Her expression broke. The sharpness, the disdain that had once been her mask, melted into something fragile, something human. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it hovered near his wounded shoulder. "Why would you do this? Why would you throw yourself into danger for me?" "Because it was right," Daniel said simply. His voice was tired, but his eyes held hers without faltering. "Because if I had stood by and done nothing, I would not deserve to be here." Her breath caught. In that instant, something shifted between them, something undeniable. She looked at him not as an intruder, not as a pawn, but as a man. From that night, the ice began to crack. The other princesses noticed. The eldest, proud and fierce, spoke to him with suspicion but no longer with mockery. The second, sharp-tongued and quick-witted, tested him with questions instead of scorn. And the youngest, the one whose life he had saved, lingered near him, her eyes soft, her words warmer. Their banter grew subtle. At meals, when nobles muttered darkly, Daniel would mutter a dry comment under his breath, and one of the sisters would stifle a laugh. In the quiet corridors, he caught their glances, sometimes curious, sometimes challenging, sometimes something deeper. Rumors spread faster than fire. The same court that had laughed at him now whispered in scandal. The human, once humiliated, now stood at the center of forbidden tension. The princesses who had mocked him were no longer mocking. They were watching. They were drawn. And slowly, painfully, dangerously, they were beginning to care. The palace could not hold its silence forever. Whispers had turned to plotting. Scorn had turned to hatred. And hatred, when pressed long enough, always turned to violence. The council of nobles met in secret chambers, their silver eyes burning with outrage. To them, the king's decree had been more than madness. It had been an insult to their power. The royal daughters, symbols of unity, had been promised to their houses for generations. Now that future had been stolen by a single word, a human word. So they made their choice. The coup began on a night heavy with storm clouds. Daniel felt the shift before he saw it. The palace air grew tense, guards at their posts glancing nervously, shadows moving where none should be. Then the silence shattered with the clash of steel and the cries of betrayal. The great halls of crystal erupted into chaos. Guards loyal to the throne clashed with traitors in armor marked with secret emblems. The king's banners fell from the balconies, torn down by those who had sworn allegiance to him only days before. Daniel stood in his chamber when the alarm rang. The translator badge pulsed with frantic voices. Protect the king. Protect the heirs. The door burst open. Not an assassin this time, but a guard loyal to the throne. His violet face was pale with urgency. The council moves against his majesty. You must come now. Daniel grabbed nothing but his courage and followed. The corridors burned with battle. Crystal walls glowed red as blades clashed, sparks raining across the marble floors. Bodies lay crumpled where loyalty had failed. The palace itself seemed to shudder beneath the weight of treachery. They reached the throne hall and Daniel froze. The king stood at the center, surrounded by loyalists, his white and gold robes now spattered with blood. Before him surged wave after wave of traitors, nobles who had once bowed now raising steel against him. And at the far end of the hall, the three princesses huddled together, their gowns torn, their guards overwhelmed. Daniel did not hesitate. He rushed to them, ducking a strike from a traitor's blade, seizing a fallen spear from the ground. He planted himself before the sisters, his chest heaving, his stance firm. You will not touch them, he growled, the translator badge almost sparking with the force of his voice. The traitor sneered. You? A human? He lunged. Daniel sidestepped, slamming the spear shaft across the man's legs, then drove the blunt end into his chest. The traitor fell gasping. Daniel turned to the princesses, his voice sharp. Stay behind me. Do not move until I say. The eldest princess glared at him, pride flashing even in the face of danger. You cannot shield us alone. There are too many. Daniel met her gaze with steel. Then we will outthink them. He drew a deep breath, his mind racing back through the scraps of Earth's history he had studied. Not battles fought with power and glory, but wars fought with desperation, wars where cunning outweighed strength. He seized a fallen banner, tore it from its staff, and tossed it across the floor. The silk caught fire from a shattered lantern, flames erupting in a wall that cut the hall in two. The traitors stumbled, blinded by smoke. Loyalists surged forward through the gap Daniel had opened. He barked orders, not as a king, not as a general, but as a man who refused to let others fall. Pull the wounded back. Form a line at the steps. Use the pillars. Bottleneck them. His voice rang clear, the translator badge struggling to keep up. But the meaning was understood. And to their shock, the alien guards obeyed. Step by step, they pushed the traitors back, the fire and smoke turning the grand hall into a battlefield of confusion. Daniel fought beside them, every strike of his spear guided not by training, but by instinct and will. He bled from cuts across his arms, his shoulder throbbed with old pain, but he did not falter. At one moment, a traitor broke through the line, rushing toward the princesses with a blade raised high. Daniel lunged without thought, driving his body between them and the strike. The blade slashed his side, searing white-hot, but he shoved forward, knocking the attacker to the ground and ending the threat with the butt of his spear. The youngest princess caught him as he stumbled, her silver eyes wide with fear. Daniel, you are bleeding. I am standing, he rasped, pushing her gently behind him. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. The palace shook with battle, but slowly, the tide turned. The nobles had planned treachery, but not resistance like this. Not a human at the heart of the defense, rallying those who still believed in the king. At last, the traitors broke. They fled into the night, leaving the throne hall littered with bodies and smoke. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of dying flames. The king, bloodied but unbowed, looked across the hall to Daniel. The human stood trembling, his clothes torn, his body marked with wounds, his chest rising and falling like a storm. And behind him, the three princesses stood alive, untouched. The king's silver eyes burned with something Daniel had never seen before: pride. The smoke lingered long after the fighting ended, clinging to the crystal walls of the throne hall like a shadow that refused to fade. The loyal guards dragged the bodies of the fallen traitors away, their armor scratched and their faces heavy with exhaustion. Healers moved swiftly among the wounded, their hands glowing faintly as they worked. And at the center of it all stood Daniel Ward. His shirt was torn, his side bled, his arms shook with exhaustion, but he stood. His spear was broken, snapped in two during the final clash, yet he still held it tight, unwilling to let it go until the danger was truly gone. The king descended from the throne, his steps steady despite the blood on his robes. The hall fell silent. Even the groans of the wounded seemed to hush as his voice carried through the chamber. "This night," he said, "betrayal was unmasked. Our own sought to overthrow the throne, to seize power for themselves. But they were defeated." His silver eyes swept across the guards, the servants, the ministers who dared remain. Then his gaze settled on Daniel. "And they were defeated not by me, nor by you, but by him." The words struck the hall like a thunderclap. Dozens of silver eyes turned to Daniel. For a moment, all he saw was disbelief. But then slowly it shifted. Awe, respect. The king lifted his hand, his voice resonant. This human, mocked and scorned, stood when others faltered. He protected my daughters when blades sought their lives. He led my loyal guards when treachery threatened to devour us. He is no pawn. He is no weakness. He is proof that strength does not come from blood or title. It comes from the will to stand, even when standing means death. The hall erupted in murmurs. Some nodded, some stared in silence. But no one laughed. Daniel's chest tightened. He felt the weight of every gaze pressing on him. He wanted to deny it, to say he had only done what anyone should have done. Yet deep down he knew. He had faced death twice and survived. He had defended those who despised him. He had earned this moment. Then the king turned to his daughters. "Speak, children. You mocked him once. What say you now?" The eldest princess stepped forward first. Her voice, once sharp with scorn, trembled with something new. "I thought him beneath us, but I saw him fight when even trained warriors fell. I saw him stand against a tide that would have drowned us. He is no less than any Veltherin. He is more." The second princess followed, her silver eyes shining. "I laughed at him once because I thought him fragile, but I see now he is not fragile. He is unbreakable. His courage is greater than ours because he had no reason to fight. Yet he did." And finally, the youngest. Her voice broke, but her words were clear. "He saved my life. He bled so I would not fall. And when I asked him why, he said only that it was right. No prince, no suitor of our kind, has ever given so much without demand. I mocked him once. I will not again. I love him." Her confession silenced the hall. The other two princesses glanced at her, their expressions tightening, but then, slowly, they nodded. One by one, all three sisters turned to Daniel. No longer rivals in mockery, but rivals in affection. And for the first time, the court saw not a human intruder, but a man who had won the admiration, and perhaps the hearts of alien royalty. The king raised his hand once more. "Then let it be known. This human will not only be their husband. He will be a symbol of unity between our kind and his. Let the empire see that the walls we built between species can fall. Let them see that strength and honor do not belong to one people, but to all who choose to stand." The declaration shook the court. Some nobles bowed in reluctant acceptance. Others whispered with renewed fear, but none dared defy it. Daniel stood still, his heart thundering. He had arrived on Velthera Prime with nothing but a translator badge and trembling nerves. He had been laughed at, scorned, nearly killed. And yet here he was, bloodied but unbowed, standing as the chosen husband of three princesses, watched not with ridicule, but with awe. Days later, when the smoke had cleared and the traitors had been punished, the royal wedding was announced. The empire gathered in the Grand Plaza, its towers glowing brighter than the stars. Daniel stood at the altar, the three sisters beside him, their gowns shimmering with living light. The crowd, once so eager to mock, now stood in stunned silence. As the vows were spoken, Daniel felt the weight of what had changed. He was no longer an envoy, no longer a pawn. He was a husband, a protector, and perhaps something greater, a bridge between two worlds. When the final words were spoken and the crowd erupted in a roar that shook the skies, Daniel lifted his gaze to the twin moons above. For the first time since he had stepped foot on Velthra Prime, he felt no fear. He felt triumph. The human who had once been mocked now stood as royalty, beloved by those who had once scorned him. And deep within the Empire's heart, a seed had been planted, a belief that perhaps humanity was not so weak after all.